This is a brief lecture on the evolution of the DSM here in America. The description of maladjusted behavior or of psychiatric phenomena has a long history in the field of medicine and in the field of literature in general. If we look at America from 1917 to about 1945, there were four broad categories that we used to describe people: lunatic, imbecile, idiot, and insane. These were basically what were used legally and professionally to classify people. At the end of World War II, there were a large number of soldiers who were returning and had a variety of psychiatric disorders, and treatment for these men and women proceeded, and there's clearly a need for a broader, clearer diagnostic system. By 1952, the DSM-1 was published. It was predominantly based on the theories of a psychiatrist, a prominent psychiatrist, Adolf Meyer. Broadly speaking, his theory had two categories. One was reactions to social stress, and the other broad category was a failure to adapt to social norms. The central concept or central process there was a biographical review. It was a historical review from birth up until the moment they had walked into the clinician's office. This diagnostic and statistical manual was predominantly a clinical document. It was very clinically oriented, and the diagnostic categories were very subjective in nature. The subjective nature of DSM-1 was not well received by the general public, nor was it well received by the medical field. In addition, the behavioral perspective on mental health, the behavioral theoretical orientation coming out of psychology, increasingly cast doubts on the subjective point of view, so there was a lot of pressure on the American Psychiatric Association to revise DSM-1. By 1965, they had written DSM-2, which did a great deal, which had a large focus on behaviors. There was much more emphasis on diagnostic accuracy, and they adopted a distinct disease model. They also eliminated Meyer's concepts and ideas and really strove at this point to be an atheoretical model of psychiatry. And in some ways, this marks a pretty significant dehumanization of the process. The goal was diagnostic accuracy and reliability and validity of diagnosis became very important. This represents a pretty large medicalization of psychiatry. I graduated from graduate school in 1978, and so my psychopathology class was based on DSM-2. 2 years after graduation, DSM-3 was published and really radically changed the way that we thought about psychopathology. There was a focus on treating conditions and not people, much more movement towards a dehumanizing kind of process. There was a big push to have epidemiological accuracy and validity. The impact of research became much more powerful. And overall, there were 265 different diagnostic categories. It led to a great deal of confusion in some ways, and was really a pretty poor system. 7 years later, in 1987, the DSM-3R was published. It added diagnostic codes and started to incorporate or be parallel to the ICD-9, the International Classification of Diseases, ninth volume. The DSM-3R also added a multi-axial kind of system in which personality disorders and physical health, psychosocial stressors, and global assessment of functioning were added. This had a sense of really increasing the width, the breadth of understanding the person, and created a more comprehensive view of the person. But it also was in response to the managed care advent, and had a great deal of more dehumanization in some ways than before, even though there was more of an emphasis on the whole person. 7 years later, the DSM-4 was published. It was primarily a response to the rapidly developing epidemiological research, and some categories were shifted around, some descriptions were shifted around. A lot of the text incorporated the new research that had been published in the past 7 years, and overall the shape of it became much more oriented to educating you, providing information about the diagnostic categories, as well as just spelling out those diagnostic categories. The DSM-4 began to suggest some treatment outcomes for the different diagnostic categories, and really started to make the DSM, the diagnostic system, more clinically oriented because of this emphasis on outcomes. 6 years after the publication of DSM-4, the DSM-4 text revision was published. It corrected some basic factual errors. It's important to note that already the DSM-5 task forces were beginning to get assembled. DSM-5 really started, the process began in about 1999. The DSM-4 text revision increased the consistency with the ICD-9 and incorporated more new research that had been published. Another addition was more of an emphasis on respecting cultural diversity in understanding the diagnostic system. The DSM-5 took 14-15 years to get written, in part because many of the authors of DSM-4, many of the people who had participated in the writing and formulating of DSM-4, were not invited to the committees that were going to construct DSM-5. Much of this represented a decrease in an insistence that people not be involved with pharmacological companies, and there was a big push to include more people from outside the United States and from a variety of different theoretical orientations and scientific disciplines. Experts in twin studies, genetics, neuroscience, and the behavioral sciences in general were recruited and included in the writing of DSM-5. DSM-5 is also the first diagnostic manual that is a child of the internet. It went through an extensive process of public input, discussion, and participation in its writing, and so it reflects a lot broader base than previous diagnostic manuals. In general, the DSM-5 has 20 broad classifications. They are listed chronologically, beginning with childhood disorders.
And so that is an overview. I encourage you to look at DSM-5 to just broadly get an idea of the organization by looking at the table of contents.